In 1823, a ship arrived at the coast of present-day Honduras, carrying settlers who had sold everything they owned. They expected a thriving colony with a capital city, fertile farmland, and welcoming neighbors. What they found was untouched jungle and nothing else. These families had purchased land certificates, exchanged their savings for a foreign currency, and boarded ships bound for a country called Poyais. But Poyais did not exist. It had never existed. It was the invention of one man. His name was Gregor MacGregor, and he is widely considered the perpetrator of one of the most audacious frauds in recorded history, a con so elaborate it came complete with its own flag, constitution, and national currency. Gregor MacGregor was born on Christmas Eve, 1786, in Stirlingshire, Scotland. His father, Daniel MacGregor, was a sea captain for the East India Company. From the start, young Gregor was surrounded by stories of distant lands and grand ambitions. At just 16, MacGregor joined the British Army in 1803. He served in the Peninsular War until 1810, gaining genuine military experience that would later lend him enormous credibility. In 1812, MacGregor made a dramatic pivot. He joined the Republican side in Venezuela's War of Independence, fighting under the legendary Francisco de Miranda and later Simón Bolívar himself. He rose to the rank of general. His military exploits were real. In 1817, MacGregor led a force that captured San Fernandina on Amelia Island, Florida, from the Spanish. He was, by any measure, a genuine war hero. And this is what made his later deceptions so devastatingly effective. MacGregor was charismatic, well-connected, and he wore his military rank like armor. When he returned to Britain in 1821, he did not arrive as a con artist. He arrived as a decorated general with first-hand knowledge of the Americas. And that is what made what came next so extraordinary, because the man who walked into London's financial district that year did not come to invest. He came to sell an entire nation, one that existed only in his imagination. MacGregor claimed that King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito Coast had granted him a vast territory on the Gulf of Honduras and bestowed upon him the title of Cazique, meaning chief or prince. He called this territory Poyais. He described Poyais as a developed colony with a capital city called St. Joseph, a place with government buildings, churches, and a community of English-speaking settlers already living there. None of it was real. MacGregor fabricated an elaborate infrastructure of deception. He had forged currency printed, Poyaisian dollars. He created official-looking land grant certificates. He designed a national flag and drafted a constitution for a country that did not exist. He published a guidebook complete with maps and illustrations describing Poyais' climate, resources, and opportunities. He even established what functioned as a fake embassy or land office in London to process applications from would-be immigrants. Then came the financial coup. MacGregor convinced London banks to back approximately £200,000 in Poyaisian bonds and securities, a staggering sum in the 1820s. Investors lined up, trusting a general's word. In 1822 and 1823, an estimated 250 or more settlers departed England and Scotland for Poyais. Families sold their homes, their businesses, everything, to start a new life in a land of promise. When those settlers arrived at the Black River area of present-day Honduras, they found no capital city, no buildings, no farms, no infrastructure of any kind. Just dense, unbroken tropical jungle stretching in every direction. Stranded thousands of miles from home with no supplies and no shelter, settlers fell ill with malaria, yellow fever, and dysentery. More than half of them perished. The survivors were eventually evacuated in 1823 by the Belize superintendent Edward Codd. In late 1823, fewer than 50 survivors staggered back to Britain. Emaciated and broken, they carried with them the truth, and they told anyone who would listen. Newspapers began publishing their harrowing accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged Poyasian dollars that settlers had exchanged their real money for were worthless. The land certificates they had purchased guaranteed plots in a city that had never been built. Every official document was a fabrication. Yet remarkably, MacGregor was not arrested in Britain. Some historians speculate that authorities were reluctant to prosecute because too many prominent and powerful people had been duped, and a public trial would have been deeply embarrassing. So MacGregor did what any rational person would never expect a freshly exposed con artist to do. He fled to France and immediately attempted the exact same scheme on French investors. In Paris, MacGregor reportedly raised as much as £300,000 from new investors, an even larger sum than in London. He used the same playbook: bonds, land grants, and promises of a paradise waiting across the ocean. But French authorities proved more skeptical. When settlers began applying for passports to travel to Poyais, officials could not verify the country's existence. Suspicion mounted. French authorities stopped a ship full of would-be settlers before it could depart. They investigated MacGregor's claims and found them to be entirely fictitious. On the 7th of December, 1825, Gregor MacGregor was arrested on fraud charges. MacGregor stood trial in a French court in April of 1826. The prosecution presented fabricated bonds, fake currency, forged land certificates, and fictional maps, the entire machinery of an invented nation laid out as evidence. MacGregor's defense was audacious in its own right. He shifted blame to his associates and argued that there was no criminal intent, that he genuinely believed in the existence and potential of Poyais. There were two trials, one in April and another in July of 1826. In both, MacGregor maintained his innocence. The man who had fabricated an entire nation now fabricated an entirely new version of events. Incredibly, the French court acquitted Gregor MacGregor. Only one associate, a man named Lee Huby, was convicted and sentenced to 13 months in prison. The architect of the scheme walked free. The acquittal sent a clear message, or rather, the absence of one. Despite mountains of fabricated evidence and the testimony of ruined investors, the court determined that criminal intent had not been proven beyond doubt. MacGregor left France a free man, and what he did next defies belief. He returned to London, the very city where his fraud had been exposed, and set up a new office near the Bank of England. From his London office, MacGregor continued running smaller Poyais bond schemes until approximately 1837. For over a decade, after being publicly exposed, he kept selling paper in a country that everyone knew did not exist. The question that haunted investigators, journalists, and victims alike was simple. How? How did a man whose fraud had been splashed across every newspaper in Britain continue to find buyers? The answer may lie in the psychology of his victims. Some of MacGregor's earlier victims reportedly continued to defend him, whether out of genuine belief or because admitting the fraud meant admitting they had lost everything for nothing. The sunk cost was not just financial, it was emotional. MacGregor was never prosecuted in Britain, not once. Despite the deaths, the ruined families, and the forged securities, the British legal system never held him accountable. The reasons remain a subject of historical debate. After his wife's death in 1838, MacGregor left Britain for the last time. He sailed to Venezuela, the country where he had once fought as a genuine revolutionary. The Venezuelan government restored his military rank and granted him a general's pension. On the 4th of December, 1845, Gregor MacGregor died in Caracas at the age of 58. He was buried with full military honors in Caracas Cathedral. The man who invented a country was laid to rest as a hero. Gregor MacGregor is often called the perpetrator of the greatest confidence trick in history. He didn't just forge a document or fake a credential. He fabricated an entire sovereign nation and marketed it so convincingly that people gave their lives for it. Modern commentators have called the Poyet scheme the original Fire Festival, a comparison that, while catchy, understates the tragedy by centuries. MacGregor's victims did not lose a holiday. More than half of those who sailed for Poyet lost their lives. Financial historians consider MacGregor one of the earliest fraudulent sovereign bond issuers, a template for a kind of deception that would recur throughout the centuries. The mechanisms he pioneered, fake documentation, leveraged credibility, and manufactured legitimacy, remain the foundations of modern financial fraud. Perhaps the most unsettling element of the Poyet scheme is not the fraud itself, but the total absence of justice. MacGregor was acquitted in France, ignored by British prosecutors, and celebrated by Venezuela. He faced no consequences whatsoever. The settlers who died in the jungles of Honduras have no memorial. Their names are scattered across parish records and ship manifests. They were ordinary people who trusted the wrong man, and they paid the ultimate price for his imagination. Gregor MacGregor invented a nation, sold it to hundreds of trusting families, and was never punished. He died with full military honors, buried in a cathedral, while his victims were buried in unmarked graves in a jungle that was never meant to be their home. A new case drops every day. Subscribe so you never miss one.